The water burned in my lungs as I thrashed helplessly against the current. At 8 years old, I couldn't understand how our perfect summer day had transformed into this nightmare so quickly. One minute, Jason and I were playing at the edge of the river, laughing as we skipped stones across the surface. The next, I had slipped on the muddy bank and plunged into the icy water. "Ethan!" I heard my 12-year-old brother scream my name as the current dragged me away from shore. People say that drowning is peaceful. They're wrong. It's violent. Your lungs fight for air while your mind races with the terrifying realization that you're losing. My small arms flailed uselessly against the powerful flow that had captured me. Beneath the surface, the river was a different world, dark, cold, and indifferent to my struggle. Then suddenly I felt strong hands grabbing my shirt. Jason had jumped in after me. He pulled with all his might as he kicked toward the riverbank. I remember looking at his face, his eyes wide with determination, his jaw clenched with effort. Even as a child, I recognized what absolute love looked like in that moment. "Hold on to me, Ethan," he gasped between breaths. "Don't let go." When we finally reached the shore, we collapsed on the muddy bank, both of us coughing and sputtering. My mother, who had been setting up our picnic just a short distance away, came running, her face white with horror. "I got him, Mom," Jason said, his voice hoarse. "I got him." That day transformed our relationship. Before, we had been typical brothers, competitive, constantly bickering over trivial things. After the river, there was an unspoken bond between us. Jason became my hero, my protector, and I worshipped him for it. As we grew up in our small Connecticut town, Jason always looked out for me. When bullies targeted me in middle school, he was there. When I struggled with algebra in 9th grade, he sat with me for hours explaining concepts until they clicked. When our parents' marriage began to crumble during my sophomore year, Jason, home from his first year at college, was the steady rock I clung to. "We're brothers," he would say. "Nothing's more important than that." By the time I reached college myself, Jason had graduated and landed a job with a prestigious engineering firm in Boston. I followed his footsteps, majoring in civil engineering, but choosing to attend school in New York. We'd meet halfway between our cities every few months, sharing beers and stories of our separate lives. It was during my junior year that I noticed the changes in him. Subtle at first, dark circles under his eyes, a slight tremor in his hands, a new edginess to his personality. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd brush it off. "Just work stress," he'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nothing to worry about, little brother." But there was something to worry about, something I couldn't see clearly until it was too late. I should have pressed harder when Jason missed our scheduled meetup that spring. His text, "Sorry, can't make it. Deadline at work," seemed plausible enough, but when he missed the next one too, and then stopped answering my calls for days at a time, the worry settled in my stomach like a stone. "Have you talked to Jason lately?" I asked my mother during our weekly call. "Not for a couple of weeks," she admitted. "You know how he gets when he's busy with a project." But this felt different. When I finally reached him, his voice sounded hollow, distant. "I'm fine, Ethan. Just swamped." The conversation was brief, almost clinical. Nothing like my brother's usual warmth. I decided to surprise him with a visit. Taking the train to Boston on a Friday afternoon, I arrived at his apartment building as the sun was setting. When he opened the door, the shock on his face quickly gave way to something else. Was it shame? His apartment was immaculate. Too clean, as if recently and hastily straightened. But Jason himself looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. His eyes were sunken, constantly darting around the room. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not unkindly, but with an edge of panic. "I was worried about you," I said simply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. That weekend revealed the truth I'd been refusing to see. My brother, my hero, was struggling with addiction. I found the pills hidden in his bathroom, tucked inside an empty deodorant container. Prescription opioids. When confronted, his denial crumbled quickly. "It started after my back injury," he explained, shoulders slumped in defeat. "The doctor prescribed them, and then—" His voice trailed off. I listened as he described the familiar spiral: increasing tolerance, doctor shopping, and eventually turning to less legitimate sources when prescriptions ran out. What had begun as pain management had evolved into a full-blown dependency. "Let me help you," I pleaded. "We can find a treatment program. I'll take time off school if I need to." Jason looked at me with the same determined expression I remembered from the river all those years ago. "I can handle this. I promise I'll get help." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But I also recognized the defensive mechanisms of addiction from the pamphlets I'd frantically read on the train back to New York. I researched treatment options, created a plan, and called him daily. Sometimes he answered. Sometimes he didn't. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Jason at 2 a.m. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said, his voice clear for the first time in months. "I've been such an idiot. I'm checking into a treatment center tomorrow. 30-day program." Relief washed over me. "That's amazing, Jason. I'll come visit as soon as they allow it." "No need," he insisted. "Focus on your finals. I'll be fine. When I get out, we'll meet halfway like old times." The call ended with his promise to text me the facility's information in the morning. I fell asleep easier than I had in weeks, believing the worst was behind us. The text never came. Instead, my phone rang at 6:17 a.m. It was my mother, her voice breaking as she delivered the news that would split my life into before and after. Jason had been found in his apartment, the victim of an overdose. "He left a note," she sobbed. "He said he was sorry." The world tilted on its axis. My brother, my protector, my hero, was gone. The funeral was a blur of sympathetic faces and empty platitudes. He's in a better place now. At least he's not suffering anymore. Words that did nothing to fill the gaping hole left in my chest. I stood stoically beside my parents, accepting condolences from people who had no idea who Jason really was, who couldn't possibly understand the magnitude of what the world had lost. After everyone had gone, I sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by the carefully constructed veneer of normalcy he'd maintained. Diplomas and professional awards hung on the walls. A shelf of engineering textbooks stood neatly organized, everything in its place, hiding the chaos that had consumed him. In his desk drawer, I found a journal. The early entries were detailed analyses of projects he was working on, reflections on books he'd read. Then gradually, they transformed into raw confessions of shame, fear, and desperation. "I can't let Ethan see me like this," one entry read. "He looks at me like I'm some kind of hero. What would he think if he knew the truth?" The final entry, dated the night of our last phone call, struck me like a physical blow. "I promised Ethan I'd get help tomorrow. I need to try. For him." He had meant it. Among his belongings, I found a printed confirmation for admission to a rehabilitation center, scheduled for 9 a.m. the morning after he died. He had made the call after speaking with me, paid the deposit, packed a bag. Everything was ready. But sometime between our call and dawn, something had changed. Perhaps a moment of weakness, one last high before starting recovery. The medical examiner said the dose was unusually pure, much stronger than what he would have been accustomed to. For months afterward, I tortured myself with what-ifs. What if I had visited more often? What if I had recognized the signs earlier? What if I had insisted on staying with him that night? I dropped out of school and spiraled into my own darkness. My mother worried I might follow Jason's path, but my poison was different. I punished myself with isolation and regret rather than substances. It was Jason's former colleague who eventually pulled me back into the world of the living. She reached out 6 months after the funeral, asking to meet. "Jason talked about you constantly," she told me over coffee. "How proud he was of you. How brilliant you were going to be." She handed me a thumb drive. "He was working on this before we lost him. He said it was inspired by you." It contained plans for a community outreach program, engineering workshops for underprivileged kids, particularly those affected by addiction in their families. In his proposal notes, Jason had written, "Inspired by my brother Ethan's belief that everyone deserves a second chance." I stared at those words for hours. I hadn't saved Jason, but maybe there was still a way to honor what he meant to me. 2 years later, I stood in front of the first class of the Jason Reid Memorial Engineering Program. 20 teenagers, many from recovery-affected families, looked back at me with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. "My brother saved my life when I was 8 years old," I began. "He jumped into a river without hesitation because I was in trouble. That's the kind of person he was. Brave, selfless, and fiercely protective of those he loved." I paused, looking at their faces. What I couldn't understand for a long time was that sometimes, the strongest people need saving too. And sometimes, despite our best efforts, we can't save them. But we can honor them by reaching out to others who are still here. The river took nothing from me that day when I was 8, but addiction stole my brother, leaving me with an emptiness I'll carry forever. Yet in that emptiness, I found purpose. Jason saved my life once with his hands. Now, through his legacy, he's saving it again.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming soon.